It seems like I just keep bringing up Space Invaders in my other videos. It's not really intentional, the game's just that influential. So I guess I should stop beating around the bush and just talk about why this game was so impactful, not only to the arcade and home console scene, but also to game design in general. The arcade game was designed by Tomohiro Nishikado, a developer who worked at Taito, whose previous work had been on electronic amusement machines rather than video games. Inspired by Atari's own Breakout, Nishikado created something of an evolution of Breakout's wave-based screen-clearing premise. This game, however, would feature the blocks fighting back. Due to a mix of technical limitations, Taito not allowing games to be made involving shooting soldiers, or really any humans in general, and the Japanese debut of Star Wars in the theaters at that same time, Nishikado would decide upon a space theme for his new game. The game was released in early 1978 and quickly became a huge hit in Japan, with some arcades being called Invader Houses because of the sheer amount of Space Invaders machines being played. Later that same year, Taito's American branch would bring the game west, originally starting in test markets before partnering with Bally Midway to officially manufacture and release the cabinets nationally. While never quite hitting the same level of success that it did in Japan, it would still prove to be a very popular and influential game, directly leading to the arcade boom of the early 80s. In case you're somehow not familiar with the game, the basic premise is that waves of alien invaders are coming down to Earth, and it's your job to make sure they don't reach the planet's surface. To do this, you're given a mobile missile launcher to shoot down these aliens and 3 lives. The arcade cabinet has 3 buttons. 2 buttons to move the missile launcher left and right, and 1 to actually fire the missiles. The controls are very simple, but it's important to master not only your movement, but also the timing of your shots, since you can only have 1 missile on screen at a time. Each type of invader is worth a different point value. The first 2 rows are worth 10 points each, the next 2 rows are worth 20, and the final row are worth 30. And then there's what the game calls the mystery ship. It's essentially a flying saucer that enters the screen from either the right or left corner every 25 seconds or so. It doesn't actually pose any kind of threat to the player since it's incapable of shooting missiles of its own, but hitting the ship nets you a number of bonus points ranging from 50 to 300. I always figured this number was randomized, but apparently that was difficult to pull off with the hardware at the time, so it's actually based on the number of shots used. For example, destroying it with your 23rd shot will always get you 300 points. Space Invaders was also the game that really introduced the idea of earning extra lives. This occurs every time the player gets 1500 points, an early example of rewarding the player for doing well. That might not seem like a big deal now, but that very concept was brand new in '78. The aliens themselves move back and forth to accompanying rhythmic sounds. Every time they reach the edge of the screen, they drop down closer to the Earth by 1 row. The more invaders you take out, the faster the remaining enemies will move. The amount of horizontal movement the invaders are able to travel before dropping down is dependent on the length of the longest remaining row. In other words, if you focus on taking out all 5 aliens in a vertical row on one of the edges, it will take the invaders a longer time to move to the edges, and therefore extend the time period for them to reach the Earth. Shooting out vertical rows also gives you a better opening to hit the mystery ship as it flies by. This simple mechanic gives the game its core layer of strategy. Focusing on taking out the vertical rows buys you more time, but it also lets the lower horizontal rows get closer than ever. This introduces a risk versus reward factor. Having the aliens closer to the bottom of the screen makes them easier to hit, but it also means you have significantly less time to react to dodging their missiles. There are 4 bunkers between you and the invaders that you can hide behind. These will protect you from enemy fire, but they take damage with every shot. Your missiles will also blast through them, so you can open up a hole and fire out from behind it if you want. Doing this can give you an easier opportunity to hit some of those harder to reach enemies, but it makes you more vulnerable to their missiles, especially in later rounds where their firing rate increases. These bunkers do actually reset after clearing a wave of enemies though, so you really can use them to your advantage on a per round basis. After clearing a wave, the invaders will start again from a lower position, giving you less time than the previous round on top of their higher level of aggression. All of these elements add up to create what was really the perfect arcade game at the time. It's a simple enough concept that anyone walking past the attract screen would think, yeah, I could do that, while also being challenging enough for them to get off the machine pretty quickly. The subtle depth and strategy mixed with the goal of beating the ever-constant high score at the top of the screen would then keep them coming back with more quarters. From a design perspective, the game really was a major step up compared to just about anything else available on the market at that point. In addition, the game's massive financial success and brand recognition caught the attention of a certain American game company that was trying to continue the success of their home video game console, the Atari VCS. In 1978, a programmer at Atari, Rick Mauer, began visiting arcades to look for inspiration for new games. In that period, his path crossed a certain Taito game and was immediately hooked. This led Mauer to begin working on his own version of the game for the VCS. Internal interest on the project was initially lacking, however, and Mauer decided to switch back to working on another project that would end up being 1980's Maze Craze. A few months later, Atari management became aware of the huge profits that the game was making in the arcades and immediately began trying to secure the rights to a home version. As soon as the deal had been reached, Mauer returned to his VCS prototype of Space Invaders. The game ended up launching in early 1980 and would end up becoming the center of Atari's VCS marketing push for the rest of the year. So how does the Atari 2600 version fare against the arcade original? Well, shockingly well, actually. In fact, due to how well it blends the arcade title's addictive gameplay and the plethora of game modes and variations that Atari was known for in its early days, I actually just straight up prefer it. This was one of the first VCS games I played, and honestly, the only reason I didn't play it more often was because of how stressful I found it as a kid. The console version is also a bit easier compared to the arcade, which can lead to longer games and higher scores, something I can appreciate as someone who kinda sucks at the arcade game. That's not to say that the game is easy by any means, but the challenge feels a bit more gradual than its arcade counterpart. Considering that this is a home port where you're probably comfortably sitting in front of your TV instead of standing in front of a cabinet, I'd say that's not a bad change. It's also worth noting that if you find the difficulty to be too easy, you can change the difficulty switch on the system to the A position and your turret will become wide, and therefore a much easier target for the invaders' shots. The biggest difference here is that there are only 36 on-screen invaders instead of the arcade game's 52. It also drops the number of bunkers from 4 down to 3. It's really not that big of a deal though, and considering the limitations of the 2600, it's actually pretty impressive that Mauer managed to get that many of them on screen at one time with no flickering. New to this version of the game are the moving shields, zigzagging enemy bombs, fast bombs, and of course the 2600 specialty, invisible invaders. In those versions, the enemy waves are completely invisible until you hit one of them, at which point the remaining invaders will become visible for a brief second. It's a neat idea, but I'm not particularly good at the game when I can actually see my targets, so it's really not my thing. My friend Zayden, on the other hand, was weirdly good at it.
Now. There we go. There we go.
Oh my gosh, wow. Oh my gosh, we're on the third round of this.
That is impressive. That must be there.
Oh no, I shot one of the lower ones. Did you do it?
I was like,
you got it! You got it the last second.
Yeah, it's weird how used you can get to it. Almost because the patterns stay the same.
Yeah.
So I can almost start to kind of predict if that's the last place I saw them and they're moving at this speed, I can 1, 2, and then shoot, and it's like, okay, I got one.
Yeah.
The amount of last second ones, every single time it felt like random luck. It was just like instinct of like, I think it's there, and it would just...
The game has a grand total of 112 variations, which is kind of insane. The first 16 are all single-player modes made up of different combinations of those previously named additions. The next 16 are all repeated, but this time in alternating turn multiplayer. The following 80 variations are all alternate forms of multiplayer Space Invaders, divided into groups of those original 16 modes. The ones focused on having both players on screen at one time are my personal favorites. It turns into an almost cooperative competitive game, where both players are given the same goal of clearing out the rows of aliens. Like, you want to outscore your opponent, obviously, and you can even trap them in corners to block them off from getting more points as well, since they can't pass through your launcher, but clearing enemy waves together makes it much easier. You also share lives, so you do want to make sure that your partner/opponent stays alive as well. It's so stressful, and now we don't... Oh, I died. Do we have shared lives? Oh my god.
Oh, yes.
We do have shared lives, I think. Well, sorry for that.
Oh, that's fine.
I just really like how this mode plays out. There are also several modes that will change or split up the basic control schemes. Things like alternating who gets to fire the next missile, or one that splits left and right movement between two players, or another that divides missile firing and movement. That last one will really show you just how different your playstyles can be compared to your friends. Given how many space-themed shooters would end up on the 2600, it's easy to forget just how important and well-made Space Invaders is compared to just about every other one on the system. In fact, its depth and game mode variety would continue to beat out most of the competition for years to come. It's also arguably the most defining game on the system. Regardless of which version you play, though, its simple concept and perfect execution make Space Invaders a true masterpiece, perhaps even the industry's first.